What happens when a CEO finds himself trapped in the very experience he's unknowingly created for others and overhears a truth that forces him to change everything? Mark Ellison leaned back in his car seat, staring out at the rain-smeared runway, the glow of grounded private jets glinting under the stormy sky. His own aircraft sat idle. Mechanical issue, weather delay, take your pick. The irony didn't escape him. CEO of Nova Sky Airlines, yet tonight he couldn't even get his own plane off the ground. He checked his phone. The only commercial flight heading in his direction within the next 2 hours? One of his own. Flight 728. Overbooked, nearly full. Only middle seats left in economy. Mark sighed, running a hand down his face. Economy. It had been years since he sat back there. Not out of arrogance, at least that's what he told himself, but because time was money. Direct routes, quiet cabins, no delays. That was the lifestyle of a CEO. But tonight, the choice was simple: get home or stay stuck on the tarmac. He booked the seat. Less than an hour later, he was moving down a crowded jet bridge under the dull hum of fluorescent lighting. The scent of recycled air and distant coffee filled his nose. The boarding line crawled. A flight attendant smiled mechanically and gestured toward the back. Mark nodded silently and shuffled on, baseball cap low over his brow. Seat 34B, middle, between a college student in a hoodie and an older man with a cough. His knees brushed the seat in front of him. The tray table was sticky, no space to breathe, no space to think. A baby wailed somewhere behind him. A flight attendant passed by briskly, eyes tired, tone clipped. "Please store your bags properly, sir." Mark glanced around. Tension was thick in the cabin. People irritated, tired, invisible. The airline felt cold, transactional. He'd read the surveys. He'd seen the feedback. But sitting here, cramped, unseen, he felt it. As the plane began taxiing, Mark reached for his armrest. It was already claimed. The student didn't notice. The older man was asleep, head bobbing. Mark exhaled slowly. He wasn't a CEO tonight. He was just another name in seat 34B. And for the first time in a long time, he realized that maybe that's exactly what he needed to be. Sometimes the only way to see the truth is to sit agilely where you've told others to be. Mark shifted in his seat for the fourth time, trying to find a position that didn't make his spine ache. The seat was narrow, the cushion worn thin, and his knees were pressed so tightly against the tray table that he felt every vibration of the aircraft. He glanced to his left. His seatmate was already asleep, headphones in, mouth slightly open. To his right, the college student was tapping away on his phone, elbows claiming both armrests like territorial markers. Mark didn't complain. He couldn't. He wasn't here to be recognized. No one around him knew they were seated next to the man who signed off on this very plane's design specifications. The man who approved cost-saving policies that shrunk seat width by half an inch to squeeze in another row. The irony sat heavy on his chest, even heavier than the cabin pressure. As the plane climbed, the lights dimmed. A crying child 2 rows back grew louder. The student sighed dramatically. A woman across the aisle fumbled with an oxygen mask attachment for her elderly father, while a flight attendant rushed by with barely a glance. Mark watched, silently. Everywhere he looked, people were just trying to get through the flight. No warmth, no welcome, just survival mode in the sky. He reached for the in-flight magazine tucked behind the seat in front of him, but it was sticky. Some sort of orange residue clung to the edge. He let it fall back. Looking around, he saw tray tables with coffee rings still on them, overhead bins jammed full and barely closed, and tired faces waiting for something, anything that resembled care. The seatbelt light pinged off. The attendants rolled the cart down the aisle like clockwork. No eye contact, no real smiles. "Chicken or pasta?" one of them muttered. "Just water," Mark replied. His cup arrived with half a napkin stuck to the bottom. "Sorry," the attendant said flatly, already moving on. Mark stared at the cup, then at his reflection in the window. Was this really what they'd become? A company that transported people without noticing them? A brand that promised comfort and delivered boxes? He shifted again in his seat. The college kid beside him hadn't looked up once. The elderly man to his left coughed again, dry and strained. Mark reached into his jacket for a tissue and gently handed it to the man. The man blinked in surprise, then nodded, grateful. And for the first time during the flight, someone smiled at him, not as a CEO, but as a fellow human being. The real feedback never comes in boardrooms. It floats between whispers in the cabin. The lights above flickered as the plane leveled out at cruising altitude. A flight attendant passed by again, collecting trash, her movements automatic, mechanical. Mark shifted slightly, stretching his back, the ache in his lower spine pulsing with every small jolt of turbulence. He leaned his head back and closed his eyes for a moment, only to be pulled back into focus by a sharp voice a row behind him. They used to care, a man muttered bitterly. Now it's just fees and fake smiles. Mark opened his eyes and listened. I'm serious, the man continued. 3 years ago, they lost my luggage, gave me a travel credit and a written apology. Last month, I waited 4 hours. They gave me a printed card with a QR code. Someone else chimed in. Same for me. They charge you for everything now. Want to breathe? That'll be $20. A soft chuckle followed, but there was no humor in it, just tired resignation. Mark didn't turn around. He didn't need to. These were the voices the company never heard because they happened at 30,000 feet, far from surveys and scripted customer service calls. Here, people spoke the truth. A few rows ahead, a young mother juggled her baby in a diaper bag, trying to pour formula one-handed while her toddler kicked restlessly at the seat in front of him. A passing attendant glanced at her but kept walking. No offer of help, no empathy, just motion. The mother muttered under her breath, clearly overwhelmed. Mark watched as she tried to rock the baby while digging for a pacifier. No one offered help. No one even looked at her. Until the woman seated next to her gently reached over and said, Here, I've been there, handing her a small travel pack of wipes and a soft toy from her bag. The mother blinked, tears quickly forming. She nodded, mouthed a quiet thank you. Mark felt a weight shift in his chest. People were helping each other because the airline wasn't. Behind him, the man from earlier added, and don't even get me started on that CEO. What's his name, Ellison? I bet he hasn't sat back here since 2005. Mark exhaled slowly, pressing his tongue against the inside of his cheek. He couldn't argue. They weren't wrong. He'd read the reports. He'd seen the metrics. But none of it matched what he was living now. Not the way the air felt recycled and stale. Not the absence of kindness. Not the people holding it all together despite everything. He turned slightly, looking down the aisle. A business doesn't fall apart all at once. It erodes, bit by bit. Missed smiles, rushed hands, silenced voices. And tonight, for the first time, he was hearing them loud and clear. The people who hold the sky together are often the ones closest to falling apart. Somewhere over the Midwest, the plane hit a mild pocket of turbulence. The seatbelt sign chimed on, and the flight attendants returned to their jump seats with practiced motions. Mark glanced over and caught a brief glimpse of one of them. Blonde hair pulled back tight, eyes red-rimmed, shoulders slumped. As soon as the plane steadied, she was up again, cart rolling down the aisle like nothing happened. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Mark noticed the way she moved, efficient, robotic, like someone running on fumes. Another attendant followed close behind, rubbing her wrist and muttering something about her schedule. They barely spoke to the passengers, and when they did, it was rushed, hollow, as if every word cost energy they couldn't afford to spend. Can I have some water? A passenger asked politely. Give me a minute, the attendant replied, her voice sharp before she caught herself and added, Sorry, just a little backed up. Mark watched her move past. Her gait had a slight limp. Behind him, someone whispered, She's barely holding it together. He agreed silently. Near the galley, two flight attendants exchanged hushed words as they reloaded supplies. Mark caught only fragments, but the tension in their voices was unmistakable. This is my 12th day on. No break. No sleep. They cut the standby team again. We're flying with bare minimum crew. They expect us to smile through it like it's normal. Mark leaned back in his seat, jaw tight. He recognized that tone. Burnout wrapped in silence, resentment buried under uniforms and name tags. He'd heard it before, years ago, when the company was smaller, when he still took those calls directly. back when he still remembered everyone's name on a shift. But somewhere along the way, policies and procedures replaced people. One of the attendants passed again, and Mark gently asked, "How much longer do you have on him today?" She blinked, caught off guard by the question. Uh, we've got a turnaround after this, then one more leg, land at 2:10 a.m. That's a long stretch, he said. She smiled thinly. It's always a long stretch. Then she moved on. He watched her go and felt something settle in his stomach. Shame, maybe. Or clarity. He'd fought so hard to keep the airline profitable that he'd forgotten the people holding it together weren't numbers on a report. They were human beings, stretched thin, holding smiles in place like cracked glass. Mark turned toward the window again, the sky dark beyond the wing. The airline didn't need a new marketing campaign. It needed oxygen. Sometimes the most honest conversations are the ones not meant for you to hear. The plane had quieted, cabin lights dimmed, most passengers lulled into a restless half-sleep. But Mark couldn't sleep, not with the weight of what he'd seen pressing harder on his chest than the altitude ever could. He leaned his head slightly to the side, resting it against the cool window, when he heard two voices just behind the curtain near the galley. He hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but the words came quietly, raw, unfiltered. Two off-duty flight attendants, seated in jump seats, speaking just loud enough to hear if you were close. And he was. "I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this," one voice said, female, weary. "Same," a male voice replied. "It's like we're invisible. They cut hours, raise expectations, and then send us generic emails with thanks for your dedication. It's insulting." Mark remained still, eyes closed now, but listening intently. "You remember when people used to want to work here?" she continued. "When the CEO showed up on the crew calls? When we had proper layovers and didn't feel like zombies flying across 3 time zones with a forced smile?" He felt that one in his gut. The male voice chuckled bitterly. "Now it's like, just don't mess up and you might keep your job. Maybe. And if you do mess up, one late coffee, one impatient tone, you get written up while you're running on 4 hours of sleep and 3 hours of delays." A pause, then softer, more vulnerable. "It's like the people up top don't even know we exist anymore." Mark sat frozen. He had always prided himself on culture. That had been his thing. People first. But when had that shifted? When did quarterly reports and investor calls start drowning out the very people who carried the airline in their hands? Another voice joined them, someone walking past the galley. "Hey, didn't you both used to fly first-class routes?" "We did," the woman replied, "until they started rotating us out for consistency. Translation, burn everyone out equally." A few chuckles, low and tired. Then came the line that dug deepest. "I don't hate the job," she said. "I hate how small I feel doing it now." Mark inhaled quietly, eyes opening, staring into the darkness outside the window. That one sentence wrapped around him like cold steel. She didn't want luxury or praise. She just wanted to feel seen, to matter. He swallowed hard. He hadn't meant to hear that conversation. But maybe he was meant to hear it. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop flying above the problems and start walking through them again. It's easy to lose your way at 30,000 feet, especially when you're the one who drew the map. Mark stared down at the cup of water in his hands. The turbulence had passed, the cabin lights now a soft glow. Around him, the plane had settled into a strange stillness. People half asleep, heads leaning against windows or shoulders, their breathing slow and shallow. But inside his chest, a storm was growing. He looked again at the crew, at the lines under their eyes, the stiffness in their movements, the way they avoided lingering too long with any one passenger, as if time had become their enemy. He thought of the mother with the crying baby, the man behind him who had once believed in Nova Sky, the girl with the tired smile who'd served him his water, and the two voices behind the curtain, voices not meant for him, but that now lived rent-free in his head. "It's like the people up top don't even know we exist anymore." Mark had built this airline with his name etched into the fuselage, his vision woven into every policy, every flight path. He remembered working side by side with mechanics, helping roll carts into galleys, sitting with gate agents during delays. Back then, he was grounded, in the good way, connected, present. But somewhere along the climb to success, he'd hit autopilot. Now here he was, jammed into 34B, hidden in plain sight, hearing his company through the mouths of strangers. And the worst part? They weren't wrong. He thought about how many times he'd sat in leadership meetings, nodding along to reports that claimed employee morale remained steady and passenger satisfaction holding strong. But those reports didn't show what he'd seen tonight: the quiet burnout, the swallowed complaints, the kindness between passengers trying to fill the gap the airline left behind. His reflection in the window looked foreign, like someone trying to recognize themselves after years of forgetting. Maybe this was the identity crisis he needed. Because the truth was painfully clear now. He wasn't leading a people-first airline anymore. He was leading a machine that had lost its humanity. He turned to look down the aisle. Rows of tired travelers packed like freight, cradling paper cups in hopes of arriving on time. And among them, flight attendants who gave every ounce they had left just to hold it all together. Mark sat back, his mind already moving faster than the jet. He couldn't fix it from this seat, but he also couldn't fix it from behind a conference table anymore either. This wasn't going to be a memo or a press release. It had to start with listening, with showing up, with remembering what it meant to care without being asked. He looked back at the galley curtain and felt the moment shift inside him. He came aboard as a passenger, but he'd be stepping off as something else entirely. Sometimes the loudest decisions are made in silence, without a title, without a stage. The plane began its descent. Seatbacks straightened, trays locked into place, and the cabin lights returned with an artificial warmth that didn't quite reach anyone's eyes. Mark sat still, eyes on the floor beneath the seat in front of him, his hands resting calmly on his knees. Outside the window, city lights twinkled below like stars that had fallen and made peace with it. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing shortly," the captain's voice echoed over the intercom. "Thank you for flying with Nova Sky." Mark let the words settle in his ears. He used to feel pride hearing that line. Now it landed differently. As the wheels touched the runway, he felt a strange calm wash over him, like something heavy had finally landed with the plane. The moment the seatbelt sign dinged off, passengers around him stood quickly, grabbing bags, checking phones, resuming life. Mark stayed seated a moment longer. When he finally stood, he moved slowly, deliberately, not rushing. No one recognized him. No one even glanced twice. And maybe that was the most honest feedback of all. He had become invisible in the very system he created. Near the front, one of the flight attendants, the one with the tired eyes and the limp, stood by the exit, thanking passengers as they passed. Her smile was automatic, lips moving but eyes elsewhere. When Mark reached her, he paused. "Thank you for tonight," he said gently. She blinked, surprised someone had looked her in the eye. "You're welcome, sir," she replied, softer this time. He stepped off the plane without revealing who he was. No grand gesture, no speech, just quiet resolve coiled tightly beneath his calm exterior. Once inside the terminal, he veered off toward a quiet corner near a coffee kiosk and pulled out his phone. The screen glowed as he opened his contacts. He didn't hesitate. "Get the exec team on a call first thing tomorrow morning," he said when his assistant answered. "No delays, full attendance." "Of course," she replied. "What's this about?" Mark stared at the jet through the glass window, the same one he had just stepped off of. He watched ground crew moving with silent urgency, their orange vests glowing in the floodlights. "It's about all the things we stopped seeing," he said, "and the people who've been carrying this company while we weren't looking." He ended the call and let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Tonight hadn't just shown him what was broken. It had reminded him of why he started flying in the first place. Not to soar above people, but to move with them. Real change doesn't come from policies. It comes from people deciding enough is enough. Mark stood at the head of the long conference table, the skyline still waking up behind him as morning light spilled across the glass walls. Around him sat the company's top executives, some groggy, some curious, none prepared for what was coming. He didn't wait for formalities. I flew economy last night, he began. Seat 34B, no special treatment, no private cabin, just me, packed in like the rest. Silence fell instantly. Some raised eyebrows, others leaned back cautiously. But Mark's tone cut through it all, measured, firm, and unmistakably serious. I heard things. I saw things, he continued, not from a report, not from a filtered feedback summary, from real people, passengers, crew, a mother trying to feed her child, a man coughing with no water in reach, two flight attendants on the verge of collapse, talking about how we've forgotten them. He paused, letting the words settle. They weren't just tired. They felt invisible. The head of operations cleared his throat. We've been hitting our service KPIs. I can... Stop, Mark said, holding up a hand. The numbers don't show the truth anymore. People do. He walked around the table slowly. We've been running this company like a machine. Tight schedules, thinner seats, fewer crew, more fees. And maybe it worked for a while. Profits went up, margins held. But I sat next to the damage we've caused. I heard it. I felt it. No one interrupted now. Mark turned to the screen on the wall, tapping it to reveal a new slide. Initiative Nova, Rebuilding from Within. I'm launching an internal audit, effective today. Not for optics, for action. That includes flight crew schedules, service training, feedback loops, hidden fees, even aircraft layout. Eyes widen. This wasn't surface level. This was a full structural shakeup. I want frontline employee panels reporting directly to this office, monthly, unfiltered. He looked directly at the head of HR. We're hiring more crew per flight, doubling rest periods. Psychological safety is now part of our operational policy, not an afterthought. Then his voice softened, but it carried even more weight. We don't need a marketing campaign. We need to remember who we are, why we exist, to serve people, not process them. For a long moment, no one said anything. Then one of the execs, quiet, usually reserved, spoke up. If we'd known, you didn't, Mark said gently. Because I didn't, but now I do. So we change. He turned away from the screen and looked out the window again, watching another Nova Sky jet lift off into the pale blue morning. Let's earn our wings again, from the inside out. A company can only rise as high as the people who feel seen within it. 3 months later, the tone aboard Nova Sky flights had changed, and not just in the scripted greetings or cabin announcements. It lived in the body language of the crew, in the calm of the passengers, in the atmosphere itself. There was space again, not just in the legroom, but in the way people were treated. Flight attendants, once running on fumes, now operated on proper rest and support. Crews had grown, schedules adjusted, and wellness breaks were enforced, not encouraged. They smiled, and this time it reached their eyes. Passengers noticed too. The changes weren't flashy or loud, but they were felt. Boarding seemed smoother, service more human. Overhead bins weren't packed to chaos. Small gestures, help with a stroller, a warm blanket for an elderly man, a sincere apology for a delay, meant more than a slogan ever could. And somewhere in the middle of row 17, with his baseball cap low and his laptop closed, sat Mark Ellison. No announcement, no camera, just listening. He had begun flying economy once a month, unannounced, choosing random routes across the network. It wasn't PR. It was penance. It was presence. His way of staying close to the people he had once drifted far from. On this particular flight, he watched a young crew member kneel beside a nervous flyer during turbulence, talking her through her anxiety with calm patience. He saw another lift a heavy bag for an older woman, then offer her a bottle of water, unprompted. These weren't policies. They were people, given the freedom to care again. After the flight, Mark stayed behind while the last passengers disembarked. He thanked the crew personally, by name. The purser, a woman named Dana, smiled and said, "It's different now. We feel the change. And not just because the uniforms are better." He laughed lightly. "You're the reason it changed." She tilted her head. "I think the reason was watching." He nodded, humbled. Back at headquarters, employee panels had become part of the rhythm. Mark attended each one. No titles, No hierarchy, just stories, faces, and a shared mission to never drift that far again. He'd come so close to becoming the kind of leader he once swore he wouldn't be, distant, detached, and too high to hear. But now, every flight, every whispered comment in the aisle, every thank you handed with sincerity reminded him of the truth. You can't lead from above. You lead from the middle seat.